a gospel tune beneath the weight of a blood red moon. Justice sleeps in southern dust, but bones remember what lies can't hurt.
All right, guys, welcome back to Make It Make Sense, Alabama. If it affects people's rights, safety, or ability to advocate for themselves in Alabama, we believe it deserves explanation, and that's exactly what we created this podcast to do. My name is Neeli Faulkner. With me is my partner, Whitney Scapecchi. We're focused on accountability, justice, and vivid understanding across the state. Each of our episodes breaks down complex issues in plain language using public records, personal interviews like we're doing today, and verified information.
And today on the show, we have Rear Admiral William Kent Davis. He's a retired U.S. Navy officer and former commissioner of the Alabama Department of Veteran Affairs. He served from February of 2019 through October of 2024, was born in Montgomery, Alabama, and spent nearly 31 years in the U.S. Navy, ultimately retiring with the rank of Rear Admiral in 2016. Following his military career, he was selected by the Alabama State Board of Veteran Affairs to lead the ADVA. That would be the state agency responsible for administering services and benefits to Alabama's veterans. He officially assumed the role of commissioner on February 19th, 2019. During his tenure, Davis frequently advocated for expanded support for veterans, particularly in areas such as mental health services, veteran home care, and scholarship programs for military families. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kent. We're happy to have you.
Thanks so much, Whitney. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
Did we get your bio right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm
Good.
sitting here thinking, who is that guy?
Right? We like to
always
make
try
us
to
sound
make our
good.
guests sound amazing.
Thank you. That was very kind.
Of course. Well, thank you for what you did in your time serving in your role for our veterans across Alabama. We have had other guests on that have served for our country, and we appreciate you guys so much for what you did, and further for what you did for other veterans across the state here. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks. I'm still working with veterans in the nonprofit world quite a bit.
Awesome. We love that. We need a lot of attention in that area for sure for those men and women. So for people that don't know you, you served more than 3 decades in the U.S. Navy. You retired as a Rear Admiral. What led you from military service into leading Alabama's Department of Veterans Affairs?
Well, it was a very competitive, selective process, hopefully completely merit-based. So it's kind of strange. I was actually working at Maxwell Air Force Base at the time. I was the director of communication and outreach for Air University there. Really enjoying it. That's a great professional environment. And let me clarify, I spent over 30 years in uniform, but about half of my time in uniform, I was a reservist. So I had a civilian career as well. And most of that time, I was an attorney. I was a practicing attorney. I started out as a military JAG, what they call it, a military in uniform attorney. I worked for a big law firm in Atlanta, Georgia for a while, one of the big silk stocking law firms, and worked about 80 hours a week. And then after 9/11, I joined the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and worked for Homeland Security for about 14 years while holding that dual military career. And in the military, I was actually in the Army and the Navy over my 30 years and did a lot of combat zone deployments, deployed to 5 combat zones. Most recently, spent 7 months in Afghanistan doing a tough mission. And in the military, towards the end, I did public affairs and some legal work as well. So strangely, it was probably at the end of 2018, a lot of people contacted me and said, in my job at Maxwell Air Force Base, hey, the Commissioner of Veterans Affairs in Alabama is retiring. They're looking for a new commissioner. We think your job skills and background will be perfect. Even the mayor of Montgomery contacted me and mentioned it. I knew the previous commissioner, really nice gentleman. Ironically, was also a retired Navy Rear Admiral. And I thought, what the heck? I'll put in for it. They had over 60 applicants for the job.
Wow.
And I kept getting called back as they narrowed down the pool. And finally, there were 3 final candidates who were interviewed in a public meeting. It's kind of scary to walk into a room with about 50 people and be grilled for about an hour in an
Yeah.
interview. But before I even left the building, I was offered the job. And I had told my boss, the 3-star general who was my boss at Maxwell Air Force Base, that I'm looking into this. I don't know what'll happen. He was very supportive. And when I got the offer, I said, let me talk to my boss and my other boss, my wife, before I give you an answer. And I talked to both of them, and the general, it was General Cotton at the time, was very supportive. And he said, oh my gosh, Kent, what an opportunity to go serve our brothers and sisters who have worn the uniform. So I took the job in February of 2019 and just was thrilled to death to be able to serve those who have served others.
This is a weird question, Kent, but did you ever work at Redstone Arsenal?
I never worked there. I've spent a lot of time up there, both when I was in Homeland Security, because Redstone Arsenal is not only military, but obviously they have NASA, and there's a big FBI training facility up at Redstone Arsenal. And I spent time at the FBI training center when I was with Homeland Security, and in my military career spent some time up there as well.
I only asked because you just, even when I saw your name and your background, you just seem very familiar to me for some reason. My dad was a civilian employee at Redstone Arsenal with what used to be CCWS Project Office. I think now it's TACM Project Office. And, he passed away many years ago, but I just, I grew up in the Huntsville area and lived there. And you just seemed really familiar for some reason. This is probably not it, but I'm going to figure it out maybe by the end of the conversation. I'm going to figure it out.
Well,
When you
Neeli,
said something about you worked with civilians, I'm like, I'm going to figure this out.
I go all over the state. I've been to all 67 counties in Alabama. I still travel quite a bit to veterans functions. I'm heavily involved in other nonprofit activities. I'm in Rotary Club, on the board of directors for Operation Iron Rock. I'm the vice president of the River Region Veterans Coalition, and I'm in every veterans organization I think that would actually admit me. So I go everywhere.
My gosh. I thought I wore a lot of hats, but my gosh.
Yeah, we didn't put that in your bio. We should have.
I love civic activities, church activities. My wife tells me, you need to slow down. Luckily, I'm still able to do all that. I just thoroughly enjoy it, though.
That's awesome. What would you say when you first took your role as commissioner? What were the most urgent issues facing veterans in Alabama at that time?
Great question. Clearly, I think the issue most pressing was veterans' mental health. There were other things. For instance, when I took over as commissioner, I quickly learned we had the longest waiting list in the country to get into our state veterans home system. And just to quickly explain that, Veterans Affairs is a pure partnership between the federal government and the states. And there are very defined roles, and it's a complementary relationship. I think it was a good relationship in Alabama. It definitely needed improvement. The breakdown in the functions is the federal government largely takes care of short-term medical needs of veterans. They do it through their medical centers, hospitals, and clinics. But the states are responsible for long-term care of veterans, and we literally had the longest waiting list in the country. We had neglected that function in Alabama. And I'm sad to say, I'm really tired of our state being last in statistics. I'm just going to say that up front.
Yeah.
Literally everything, yes.
So that was one big project, was to overcome that. So we started about a 5-year project to build a new state veterans home. Very rigorous process, very open, full competition for that. I can come back to that later on. Unfortunately, we built that facility and there was a major fire after I left as commissioner. So that building is out of commission for a while. But anyway, the biggest pressing problem easily was veterans' mental health. And people throw this term out, crisis, but we really were in crisis proportions in the state. The veteran suicide rate across the country it's atrocious. Just to give you a statistic, I'm old enough to remember where I was on 9/11/2001, the day we had those horrific attacks on the country. We lost about 3,000 Americans on that day. I deployed to both Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan and Operation Iraqi Freedom In those two wars, we've lost about 7,000 service members in combat. So about 10,000 losses in the global war on terrorism. Do you want to venture a guess of how many suicides in the veteran population have taken place since
I can't even imagine.
Conservative estimates are about 200,000 veteran suicides since 9/11. That is a national tragedy. To put it in Alabama terms, think about a college football weekend. That is Bryant-Denny Stadium and Jordan-Hare Stadium combined. That's the number of tragic veteran suicides that have occurred since 9/11. It's epidemic proportions. That's not the only thing. Veterans are about 2 to 3 times as likely to take their own lives as a member of the general population. There's a lot of reasons. I could go on for hours about that. I've studied this, and now I'm heavily involved in that field in the nonprofit world. But opioid addictions, at least twice as likely, disproportionately to affect the veteran community. Some of it's self-inflicted because the answer to a lot of chronic pain issues for veterans and mental health issues for years was to give a veteran a bottle of pills, usually opioids, and we're told this will solve all your problems. And as a result, we got a lot of veterans hooked on opioids, and that has led to other problems: incarceration, financial problems, suicides. So it was pretty horrific. And once again, Alabama found itself in the bottom of those statistics, and nobody seemed to be doing anything about it. So we tried to embark on a pretty robust. We started a program in 2019, and I think it was a very good program called Alabama's Challenge to prevent suicides amongst service members, veterans, and their family members. And we were making traction. For the first time in a long time in 2013, I believe the suicide rate amongst veterans actually started going down in Alabama. We were making progress. So clearly, I think that was my number one effort, was to try to resolve some of the issues with veterans' mental health. Now, I got to say this, and boy, this has gotten me in trouble, but it's the truth. I can show it empirically. This is not an editorial opinion, but boy, if you are critical, if you criticize anything in the state, people are going to come after you.
Oh, we know,
So,
Kent.
You know? Yeah.
so you had a bit of the perfect storm in Alabama. Some of the worst statistics with veterans' mental health, but at the same time, one of the worst mental health systems in the country.
Mhm.
Forbes magazine a couple of years ago did a study and ranked Alabama 47th in their mental health system. That's just a fact.
Mhm.
That's not my editorial opinion. People don't like me saying that, but I'm a firm believer that you cannot overcome a problem until you first recognize you have a problem. So it was a real problem in that we have horrible statistics that we can show empirically about veterans' mental health. We can show empirically that we do not have an adequate mental health system. We need to do something about that, clearly. So I made it a primary objective as commissioner to try to address that issue.
Mhm.
That it definitely is a problem. Anytime we talk to veterans, it's like the number one thing that we talk about. It feels like people are acutely aware that it is a problem, but then our policies and things that, like, our initiatives that we do, don't address it. It's like we know, but we don't care.
No,
And
and I'm going to
when
say
you start
something.
talking about it, you become a target. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense.
And Neeli, this is an editorial opinion. They're still not doing enough because certain people like to do the photo ops, the things that look good in the press. They're not consulting with the people who are experts in veterans' mental health. They're not doing substantive things that could really help, that are proven to help veterans. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are great programs around the country. Where I'm involved now at Vets Recover, we have a proven model for serving veterans and addressing their mental health needs. Nobody seems to listen, and nobody seems willing to do the real solutions that help folks. They want the touchy-feely things that they can get a photo op out of, especially politicians. I'm just going to go ahead and say it, but they're not
Yeah.
really helping veterans. And in the end, I would argue they're hurting veterans by funneling assets elsewhere and doing the PR type things that really have no long-term effects on veterans.
Absolutely.
Mental health is near and dear to my heart. I'm a huge advocate for mental health, but I also do not feed into the propaganda, right? I feel like, and this is my editorial opinion, I think that across America and especially in Alabama, there is a narrative that is spun about mental health. The data, one set of data never matches the other set of data. We rank much higher on, one survey than we do on the other, but national statistics, as you said, like we rank in the bottom for mental health. But I had written an article because I'm very concerned about how we are approaching mental health in our schools, in the public school system. And it was interesting to me. I ran actual numbers, and I'd have to reference that article to give you exact numbers, but compared to our neighbors, our neighboring states, the amount of money that we actually pour into mental health, which most of it goes into private mental health entities in Alabama. And we know what happens when, we funnel in our public funds into those private entities, what can tend to happen. And it was amazing to me, the amount of money that we spend compared to our neighbors, but we still rank at the bottom. So there's a disconnect there. What are we spending that money on? And obviously it's not effective.
Yeah, and Whitney, it's even tough to add assets to the field. And let me give you an example. This is not me saying this. There have been actually some very good articles on this in the last few months. Yellowhammer News, let me give them credit. They did a story about the difficulties in even getting a certificate of need in Alabama to establish a mental health center, especially a residential mental health center like the one I work at now, Vets Recover. 1819 News did a follow-up on that. It's pretty atrocious. It's very bureaucratic. It's very antiquated. Most states have followed a trend of getting rid of a certificate of need process and have said, let the market address that. If there is a need for mental health services, why would we not want to encourage the private sector to take the risk in the free market and open a residential detox or recovery center? It is virtually impossible. And I know other nonprofits who have tried in Alabama who have thrown up their hands and said, forget it. Too hard in Alabama, and they've gone elsewhere. They say, we'll put our assets somewhere else. We are antiquated in this state. We claim to be a conservative free market state, but in many respects, we're one of the most bureaucratic states in the union. I will tell you, one nonprofit came to Alabama, tried to open a center in East Alabama. They tried for 3 years. In that 3 years, they opened 3 centers in California, which we think of as a red tape bureaucratic state. They finally, just a couple of months ago, threw their hands up and said, forget it. Too difficult. We've been trying for 3 years. We can't keep throwing good money after this cause. And they ended that project. And again, we can show empirically there is a shortage of recovery beds. There's a shortage of detox beds in this state, but there was a golden opportunity that disappeared because they got so fed up with the bureaucracy in Alabama. And nobody seems to take that seriously. When you try to address that, again, you're attacked. But listen, I think I'm the poster child for that now.
Me and Neeli are both chomping at the bit because the needs assessments. And go ahead, Neeli. I know what you're thinking.
So what people don't understand too, and I'm so glad that we have you on, Kent, because it affects veterans, but it really is a spider web throughout the state. The funding going to private entities is such a huge ordeal that people don't understand. They are ingrained in every system in the state. Veterans, adults, people with disabilities, children, they're in our schools. They are everywhere. And it is the same consultants. I'm going to be careful. I'm treading carefully here, but they're the same consultants that are working with different politicians at different levels in the state that are
facilitating these deals. They're facilitating the deals between certain providers. And like you said, it's hard for anyone else to break into this because if you start looking at the board members that sit on all these boards, right? Because it's just not the certificate of needs board. It's the other board that's connected to them. And then the board connected, on this side. And it's all the same players. And I have a real problem with the fact, like we have a local board here called the Children's Policy Council. The person who keeps, or the company that keeps getting rewarded the contracts for all these different public entities for their mental health services, those same CEOs, and they should not be sitting on the board that gets to award themselves with the contracts.
Conflict of interest.
but nobody says anything about it, right?
Yeah. So there's a perfect word for this: cronyism.
Yes.
And if you go online and you just do simple modicum of research about the most corrupt states in the union, Alabama is usually mentioned, and it's usually because of cronyism. It is tough to break in if you don't know the right people in the state and you're not in their good graces.
And you're not
And I think,
giving money.
yeah, no, I think it's atrocious sometimes.
It's terrifying to me.
So you brought up
You're preaching to the choir.
I know. You get it.
You brought up the Children's Policy Council. I'm so glad that you did, because I was going to, because I have some literature here. So just for background, Whitney and I learned about the Children's Policy Council when we were looking into some allegations against Alabama DHR. And Whitney and I went and met with our local chairman of our county Children's Policy Council. I'm not going to name him because there's nothing that he's doing, I believe, that is, nefarious in this aspect. He made mention that if you want to be on the Children's Policy Council, you can be. And so you have to express interest. So I said, okay, I want to be on the Children's Policy Council. And so he said, okay. And I showed up, and Whitney was actually at the meeting, but I showed up, I guess, as like a newly appointed member of the Children's Policy Council, I guess you'd say. And one of the groups that came to speak, this is really unclear. I'd have to go back through and look at my notes, but it appeared that maybe they were trying to garner support from the Children's Policy Council. I don't really know what their goal was there, but it was Alta Point Health Systems. So Alta Point is huge in this county, and they service children in other counties. I'm mentioning this, I know we're talking about veterans, but it's all kind of one and the same. Okay. But what they've done is create a child and adolescence crisis response team for Mobile and Baldwin counties. And they put together this little flyer, and they say who's served by it, who's eligible to receive these services, what services provided. And so they kind of have a breakdown. And so they're just talking about themselves, about how great they are and all these awesome things that they're doing. And we're continuing to just pour money into the system. But this is where these consultants come into play. Because why are we spending a bunch of money on things like this? Why are we showing up to these meetings and ingraining ourselves into all these systems if we already know, like, this is what's needed and this is what the Certificate of Needs Board, they've already got the monopoly here? Why are we continuing to make ourselves look like we're just so amazing? We're so amazing. We have all these great things that we're doing. Why are we marketing ourselves? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Neeli, you answered your own question. It's all about money.
And we know that. But when you talk to people about it, they don't believe you. They're like, no, we have a mental health crisis. Yes, we do. But we are not implementing procedures that are helping people. We are implementing procedures that are making other people money. That's what we're doing.
Yes. So there's so much to unpack there.
There is.
So you're absolutely right. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And I talk about that all the time. We just keep pouring money into the same programs, systems, and it's clearly not working. If you look at the statistics, it's like people are just blind to results. And I say it even worse. We don't care about performance and results in this state sometimes when it comes to those dollars spent. Let me give you an example. This is not me. An organization that I actually have a high respect for, the Alabama Commission on the Evaluation of Services, ACES. I think this was actually a good thing that state government did. They set up this organization as kind of a watchdog to look at the efficiency of state government programs. And they've done some really good studies. They did one probably in 2020 on suicides in the state. Pretty blistering report saying state's not doing anything really to address suicides. It's interesting. The one exception that they pointed out was the Alabama's Challenge project that we were doing in Veterans Affairs. And they at least said, somebody's at least doing something. They just started this program, and that's a good sign. Well, they did one just a few months ago on the mental health crisis centers in Alabama. If you haven't read that report, you need to, because it talks about the fact that they've spent $25 million, not a paltry sum, of taxpayer dollars on the crisis centers, and they have no idea of the effectiveness. They're not tracking metrics. They're not following up. They have a one-size-fits-all formula for doling out money. It's not tailored to the needs. They're just throwing money at the issue, and they're not doing any analysis. I think the opening line of the report said there is a lack of accountability in the crisis center program. It was a pretty blistering report. And the hearing that they had on this was a pretty revealing hearing that they had. You can still watch the video of that hearing. I don't think anything will come of that because reports are done in Alabama. They are immediately filed on a shelf and forgotten about. And the attitude is, well, we did a study. Okay, spent taxpayer dollars to do another study. Don't see any results from that. You're not doing any follow-up action.
And Ken, what is the name of that committee again?
It's the Alabama Commission on the Evaluation of Services. I think a good group. They probably need to do more. There was another organization within the Attorney General's office. There was a public corruption branch led by a gentleman named Matt Hart, who wrote a great editorial recently about the lack of accountability in public corruption in Alabama. That whole office has been done away with, public corruption branch in the Attorney General's office. That was another good watchdog organization that was actually, monitoring people to make sure they were spending money correctly and not engaging in conflicts of interest or illegal acts.
Well, of course they would disband that committee. We can't have people looking into the public corruption. That's crazy.
Well, listen, if you want to, for the future leaders in this state, if you're serious, I can help you devise some reforms that would actually inject accountability into state government and efficiency. I don't know that anybody's willing to listen. They wouldn't listen to me. And there have been plenty of others. Matt Hart was one of them. I don't even know him. I've followed his work. I've read his editorials. There are plenty of others who have genuinely tried to fix things in the state. And I would throw out, you need campaign finance reform. You need
Amen. Yes.
You need an it's unlimited. There are no limits in Alabama. That's why you have lobbyists and special interest groups that really run the state.
Yes.
Because there's no restrictions on that. I mean, when legislative session is going on, it's like running a gauntlet to get through the state house with all the special interests and lobbyists that are there. They write the laws in this state. Secondly, we have a very weak ethics code. It is so nebulous. I'm an attorney, a former federal ethics attorney. I can't even figure out what the ethics rules are in this state. It's so nebulous. We have a good model, believe it or not. It was the federal model that was put in place by the original President George Bush administration. And there's an Office of Government Ethics that enforces it, that interprets it, issues advisory opinions. So federal employees have a pretty good idea what the ethics rules are. And if you're in doubt, you can get a ruling very quickly. The state ethics mechanism is pretty weak. In fact, there are empty seats on the Ethics Commission right now that the governor, for some reason, refuses to fill. And you've seen the stories about the director of the Ethics Commission right now. So that needs reform. There are so many others. I could go on for hours about things that would help reform accountability in this state. Bring back the public corruption branch in the Attorney General's office, which had a very successful track record. How about things like term limits?
Oh my God. Do you know how many people we've talked to that are running for state positions in, whether it be a district or all the way up to governor? Every single one of them says, yes, we need term limits. But those that are currently in office are like, maybe we just
don't say a word about
term limits.
So the last poll I saw on term limits amongst Alabamians, over 80% of Alabamians were in favor of term limits, and it was fairly even amongst Democrats and Republicans. When was the last time you saw Democrats and Republicans universally agree to the tune of 80% on any issue? You can look it up. Just doing a Google search for, term limits in Alabama polling, things like that. So the public recognizes it. They clearly demand it. They recognize that incumbents in the state, they have name recognition. That's 90% of the battle. They're going to get reelected, and they get in the pockets of special interest groups. They get campaign contributions that ensures they're going to stay in office. We saw this play out recently with the Public Service Commission brouhaha. I mean, there are arguments on both sides. Well, with elected PSC members, they're just bought and paid for by the special interests. Okay, if we appoint them, the same thing, because you're going to have a politician appointing them. So there is a fundamental problem in the state that we all need to recognize. I think people are starting to recognize it, but they need to get fed up enough to say, you had enough? I have. It's time to enact real reforms and join the 21st, like many other states have.
I'm going to throw something funny in here. We interviewed Chad Chig Martin, who's running on Democratic ticket for governor. And something that he talked about was his citizens-driven movement, which is pretty cool. It's basically a term for giving power back to the people. And people, you hear that and you think, well, what does that look like in practice? You know, how do people have a voice? I'm going to give you a great example. I have been advocating for a bill encouraging people to contact the committee where this bill is sitting to ask that it be placed on the committee agenda. And I'm providing emails and phone numbers, which are taken directly from the state legislative website. And one of the emails for the chairman of this committee, it keeps getting returned. And so all these people that I'm asking to reach out, they're sending me messages like, hey, it's getting returned. So I call the number, and the clerk answers, and she says, yes, his email's not working. We're aware of it. I just tell people to send it to me instead of using his correct address, because if he put his real email address on there, he would get thousands of emails. Yes. That is the point. That is literally the point. So essentially what she admitted to is that she's just fielding all of these emails and these calls, and she is the one determining whether it gets to him, if it's important enough to get to him. And I'm like, okay, well, thanks for letting me know this, because now I'm going to change my strategy. And it is unreal to me that somebody that sits in a public position, that is an elected position that represents their constituents, is too important to hear from the constituents that they serve. That's crazy.
Neeli, here's the problem. When you have people that become career politicians, Lord Acton said, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That is so true. We've gotten to a point in this country, but especially in Alabama, where I think our elected officials have forgotten that they work for us. They think just the opposite sometimes.
100%.
And unfortunately, we, the news media, we treat elected officials like celebrities. That needs to stop. It doesn't take much to be successful in politics and be real leaders. It's a simple formula. You need to be competent. And that's usually not about ideology. It's about common sense. So competence, ethics, and humility. When was the last time you saw that combination of those three characteristics in an elected official? Think about it. It's a simple formula.
Yeah.
But I can't think of anybody recently, maybe rarely, I'll encounter someone where I say, wow, you're really different. It's usually the newly elected ones, and then they become corrupted, to be honest with you, and they get into the system and forget about, they were in favor of term limits, and they kind of like the attention and the perks and dealing with the special interests and the power that they get, and sometimes the financial wealth that they get from it, from the crony system. To be honest with you, I know that's harsh, but it's true. I have served in a lot of third world countries, and what holds back a lot of third world countries is the corruption level. Saw it in Afghanistan. I see it in Alabama sometimes. It's holding this state back. And if we do not get our arms around it and solve this problem, we're going to continue to fall behind in every statistic that we're tired as proud Alabamians of seeing every time a statistical analysis apparently comes out.
And I'm proud to be from Alabama.
Me too.
We have amazing people here. And some of the initiatives that we have here are so, they're well-rounded, I guess you would say. The problem truly is the leadership. That's where the problem resides. And I think we all inherently know this, but we don't really have a great plan of how to address it and how to establish accountability, because none of our leaders are held accountable for anything that they do, ever. At any
I agree.
level.
Now, I look, and I have to blame us, the voters. I think we're lazy. Turnouts in Alabama elections tend to be low. People vote based on name recognition. They don't research results. It should be about performance. You should look at the candidates and say, what have you actually done? Not, How many photo ops have you done that really have no substantive impact? We have nobody to blame but ourselves. Elections do indeed have consequences. And you're absolutely right. We have ceded a lot of power to elected officials, and there seems to be more and more power grabs for power, and the people tend to be left out. When this country was founded, our federalist system, there was not only a checks and balances system amongst the various branches of government, and there should be, because you don't want a tyranny. But there was also supposed to be a balance of power between the people and elected officials. And I think we've ceded way, way, way too much power to elected officials and given government bureaucracy way too much power to control our lives. And that's dangerous. It was dangerous in 1776, and it's dangerous in 2026, 250 years later.
I will say that this year of all years, and it could just be from, meeting Whitney and doing this podcast, people seem very pissed off now. People seem
They do.
They
I
seem
love it.
really tired of the same old, same old. And I hope that I'm right about that. I hope it's not just because of this position that I'm in with the podcast and talking to different people and being more aware, I guess, of politics than I was previously. I was aware of politics, but only at a level in which affected crime, whether it be prison reform or wrongful convictions or things that I was covering in other projects that I was doing. It was really, I guess, limited to only that. Now I'm seeing it all over the place. And I don't know if it's because of these conversations, but I hope it's not just because of these conversations. I hope it's really that people are like, you know what? How much better off are we now than what we were? And we're just continuing to let this happen. At what point do we get pissed off enough that we say, we're done?
To your point, I think, Neeli, that people, I don't think that it's just your perception that has shifted. I do think when you look at past elections, looking at the number of people that are actually running against incumbents, right? I think that there is a genuine, I always say it's like the Great Awakening. It truly is to me. I think that more people are getting engaged. That's why I do what I do. People are like, you whine and complain on Facebook. I'm like, you know what? It's a platform and people are seeing it. They're paying attention to it and people are waking up. And I think it's
Whitney's
across.
literally like a celebrity. When I will say this,
So
when we go
embarrassing.
out, everybody recognizes Whitney. And I'm like people that you wouldn't think were recognizing her, but it's literally because she has the balls to say what everybody is already thinking. And she's criticized all the time, but people are listening.
Neeli and Whitney, I go all over the state, and I've been so heartened the last year and a half, the number of people who come up to me, never met these people, and sometimes they'll ask, are you Kent Davis? Or are you Admiral Davis? Are you the one that was fired by the governor? All of them say, that was atrocious. I followed that story, and I'm so sorry that happened. I want to apologize. I have not had one single person contact me, approach me saying, hey, that needed to happen. You weren't doing your job, especially veterans. They come up and say, you were actually fighting for us and doing things for veterans, and I'm so sorry this happened to you. And that is heartening. It's tough. And I talk to people, I say, why don't you get more involved? And sometimes they say, we see what happened to you. Man, there's a personal cost to pay, and it has cost me plenty. Again, you even criticize things in this state. You all know this. They're going to come after you. There is no sense in this state of, wow, maybe there's a point there. Maybe we need to listen and have a conversation about this. Oh, no. There's just an instant reaction. Go after this guy. Go after this gal. Silence them. Cancel them. Cancel culture is very vibrant in this state.
They try to paint you out as crazy. They try to paint you out. I hear this all the time, and I've heard this since I started, advocating at a local level. I always hear this. You have an agenda. You know what? You're damn right I have an agenda. My agenda is to tell everybody what you're doing that is not right. And
my agenda is to help veterans.
An agenda all you want. I absolutely do. And I'm being very vocal about it. 100%.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned, and I wanted to get into this conversation, your removal from office became a major political story in Alabama for those that followed. From your perspective, what do you think actually happened? What was going on around that time?
Well, some of the things we were talking about, a lot of people didn't like some of the criticisms, and I think a lot of it was about money, and I'll get into that in more details. I didn't want to say this, Whitney and Neeli, this has not been really reported out there, and I haven't used it, and I do not mean it to garner sympathy, but that was a pretty horrific time for me and my family. I got to tell you, I was battling stage 3 cancer at the time.
Oh my gosh.
A lot of people don't know that. You talk about a horrific thing to go through when you're battling cancer. I'd been through 7 months of intensive chemotherapy, surgeries. I mean, literally didn't know if I was going to survive that. And all of this hit.
Wow.
When the governor unilaterally used her supreme executive power to remove me from office, which we can get into, I literally one day lost my health insurance. My family was kicked off of health insurance in the middle of a stage 3 cancer battle. Now, luckily, about 3 months ago, I was finally declared in total remission. Beat it. Thank God.
Good. Yeah.
Congratulations.
But not a
Yes.
fun time. And the
No.
only reason I say that is, yeah, people who claim to be strong Christians, compassionate, well, they certainly weren't very compassionate towards me and my family. And arguably, I'm arguing this in federal court, I think they were illegal in some of their actions, defamatory, and I can prove that. There were so many outright lies that were told. Most of the news media was very supportive. In fact, I joked with Josh Moon one time, who called me and interviewed me. I said, Josh, I've seen the editorial cartoons from J.D. Crowe, who I've never even met in person. I think I talked to him on the phone one time. But I said, I have outlets that are leaning left and clearly those that lean right, and they're all very supportive. And Josh Moon said, that ought to tell you something. Now, there was one outlet that told outright lies about me. It turns out that outlet gets a lot of their money from the state. I think they're kind of state-sponsored media and just published talking points right out of the governor's office about me. Let me give you one example. This can be shown empirically. Simple Google search. The initial allegation out of the blue, I get an email. I don't get a phone call. I'm driving down to South Alabama on official business and get an email one day from a legal assistant in the governor's office saying, oh, the governor wants you to resign by 5 o'clock today because you have financially mismanaged funds in the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. Okay, can you give me more specifics? You're claiming that I mismanage funds. Give me some specifics. Couldn't provide any statistics. Finally, I got out of them, well, you've mismanaged federal grant money. I said, okay, I'll call for a forensic audit of the program. Call the Alabama Board of Examiners through our accountant and lawyer, and they chuckled and said, we're not going to audit you. We've audited you. We've followed this program, the allegations from the governor's office. It would be a waste of taxpayer time and money for us to audit you. Well, just a few months ago at the end of 2025, an interesting story. The State Board of Examiners did a 4-year comprehensive audit of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs, 4-year audit covering the last 4 years of my tenure as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs. You want to guess how many discrepancies they found in a 4-year audit? 0. Not one single discrepancy. It was a glowing report. I talked to experts and they said, that's pretty rare in state government for an agency to come through with absolutely no discrepancies. Kind of shoots down a claim in generic terms that I was financially mismanaging a department, including federal grant dollars, which were part of that audit. So flat out lie that was told. It was so clearly a subterfuge for the retaliation for an ethics complaint that I filed that I was required by law to file. It's so clear. Everybody knows that.
That's what I was, I have read your story. I read so much, and we first connected and I had heard about what happened to you a couple months back, but have you gone public about what that ethics complaint is? Can you at this time, or?
I didn't. Someone leaked it, and I don't know why and how. And another lie that was told. So here's how that played out. It all dealt with grant dollars that had been given to the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs that were going to go to nonprofits in the state with track records of assisting veterans. This would take hours to unpack, but the long story short, we had a memorandum of agreement that we were required by the Department of Finance to have with the Alabama Department of Mental Health. They pulled out of that agreement at the last minute, and basically it was going to doom the whole program. We weren't going to be able to distribute those grant funds to the nonprofits. The State Board of Veterans Affairs, my bosses, the ones that hired me and could fire me at the drop of a hat with a simple vote, approached me and said, we think there was something unsavory, unethical about that. We'd like you to file a complaint with the Ethics Commission and ask them to look into it. And I said, all right, that's going to create a firestorm. You do understand the state law, the state ethics code. If it's clear on one thing, it says if an agency head is made aware of ethics concerns, they have a mandatory obligation to bring it to the attention of the Ethics Commission. If that agency head, this is in black and white in the ethics code, if that agency head fails to report it to the Ethics Commission, that agency head is guilty of a misdemeanor crime for failure to report. I told the state board that, and I said, you understand that? Yes, we want you to report it. Reported it to the State Ethics Commission. I was fired as a result of that. It is pretty clear. The governor's office was even honest enough in the final letter to me to mention that as one of the reasons I was being fired for filing that ethics complaint. It's
You're
like, okay,
joking. You're joking.
No, I have it in the final letter that I was issued.
I'm going to
Now,
have to dig into this. This is very interesting to me.
Yeah, so
Go ahead.
here's what happened from there. So the Ethics Commission, mysteriously, the governor's office gets a hold of a copy of the Ethics Commission complaint that was filed. And I thought, why? Those are supposed to be secret filings. They're supposed to be confidential. Governor's office admitted to me they knew about it almost immediately. Okay, that's one problem. I filed an initial narrative about what the board had brought to my attention. I talked to some other witnesses. There was one factual error in that narrative. That original narrative somehow got leaked to the press and it got reported. I have no idea who leaked it. I was furious. I contacted the Ethics Commission. I followed up and I said, look, I think this has compromised the whole complaint. I'm asking that you formally end the investigation. It's compromised now. You're going to have witnesses colluding. It's pointless at this point. Those are supposed to be confidential filings. Didn't really respond to my request to withdraw the complaint. I also corrected a factual error I'd made in the original narrative. Clearly, they had the full facts, 100% accurate. Well, when it got leaked, one outlet said, oh, his ethics complaint was erroneous because it had a factual error in it, and the Ethics Commission had a right to dismiss it based on that. They didn't have the whole file. They reported it erroneously. As soon as the Ethics Commission dismissed the ethics complaint without even looking into the facts, didn't interview a single witness, didn't talk to anybody, within a week, I got that email from the governor's office while I was driving saying the governor wants you to resign by the end of today for mismanaging finances as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs. What a coincidence, the timing on that. Shortly after that, the State Board of Veterans Affairs convened and said, okay, we want to get to the bottom of this. This allegation has been made. We want you to do a complete accounting of the federal grant dollars, answer every question. They had a public hearing, wide-ranging, public. Anybody could have shown up. There was an audience there. There were members of the news media, I think, there. And for about 2 hours, I briefed. I answered every question, got grilled in an inquisition. At the end of that, the State Board of Veterans Affairs made a motion and unanimously voted that there was no wrongdoing to exonerate me and the department 100%. Unanimous. Infuriated the governor.
You muted, Whitney.
Yeah.
I said it didn't stop there, did it?
No,
Something
and in
else
that
followed,
vote, they also unanimously asked me to stay and complete my 4-year term as Commissioner of Veterans Affairs. Unanimous. After a thorough grilling. And that's when the governor stepped in and said, well, I don't care about any votes. She called another special meeting, didn't show up at that special called meeting of the state board. They voted again, in defiance of the governor, said, no, he's done nothing wrong. He's done a good job as commissioner. We're not removing him. And that infuriated the governor. And she said, okay, I'm just going to exercise my supreme executive power and just unilaterally remove him. Well, okay, if you had that power, why didn't you do that 2 months ago when you were first ticked off at him? Why did we go through this 2 months of public display where you said it had to go before the board? It's just one of the more bizarre incidents that I've seen. I'm trying to be objective about it, but bizarre is probably the kindest term that I can come up with. So clearly retaliation. But of course,
Yeah.
it didn't stop there. The governor was mad at the entire state board of Veterans Affairs, so pushed through a change in law and took away the powers of the state board of Veterans Affairs. Turned it from a substantive body that picked the commissioner for a 4-year term and made them only an advisory body, essentially with no substantive power, and made the commissioner of Veterans Affairs purely a political appointee who serves at the pleasure of the governor.
Oh my God.
Tell me there's not a coincidence there.
Listen, we
If you
believe
don't
in
think that's
coincidences across the
connected,
board.
if you don't think that's retaliatory, I've got a bridge out in the desert I'd love to talk about selling to you. I've
It
had
happens all the
people,
time, though.
politicians with a straight face say, "Oh, that wasn't retaliation." Are you kidding
Oh
me?
my God.
Nobody believes you.
I
So
mean, I've read enough about what happened. Retaliation absolutely is what happened here.
well, let me tell you some of the other lies that were put out. And I got to be careful because I am in federal court over all this.
Mm-hmm.
And that ain't going to stop. Look, it's costing me a lot, but come at me, bro. I'm going to come after you. We're not going to let this lie. If you want to talk out there about settling this somehow, great. But you want to get down in the mud? I'm going to get down in the mud and defend
Mhm.
veterans in this state. We are going to fight with every grain and fiber in my body. I'm not giving up on this. I will get through the federal court. That ain't the end. There's probably going to be some other filings as well. I have recordings now of defamatory comments that were made, clearly false comments that were made by some politicians, sometimes repeating what they had been fed. There's one reporter in particular who reported some falsehoods, and I will tell you some of those falsehoods that were flat out reported. It was reported that I personally picked grant recipients in that whole brouhaha, that we had tried to steer grants to particular organizations. Here's the truth. Immediately when that grant program was started, I recused myself and said, I don't even want to look at the proposals that come in, because a lot of these organizations we deal with in Alabama's challenge on suicide prevention, I don't want anyone to even have the appearance that we are favoring any particular entity. So the system we came up with was we put together a 5-person board independently to review grant proposals that came in. 3 of those 5 members were employees of the Alabama Department of Mental Health, not Veterans Affairs. There was not a single employee from the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. The other 2 members were highly respected veterans that we picked. One was the head of the USS Alabama Memorial Park here in Mobile, a retired major general who dealt with grant funds, had an impeccable reputation. The other was the head of the Air University Foundation at Maxwell Air Force Base, a retired, decorated Vietnam War veteran. I mean, impeccable people, but the majority of the people on the grading panel were from the Alabama Department of Mental Health. And this reporter had the gall to accuse me and insinuate that somehow I was the one that made the selections, was the scoring official and all of that. Then there was a lie that, well, you knew that concerns had been raised and you had been given 45 days to correct that. Just the opposite. When allegations were made by Mental Health about the grant program, the Department of Finance called and said, we're putting a gag order on you. We don't even want you to talk to potential grant recipients while we're looking into this matter. So how could I correct things when we had a gag order for 45 days where we couldn't even talk to grant recipients to address issues with grant proposals? I mean, that was a flat out lie. We were told, well, when you originally got the grant money, you sat on it for 6 months and didn't do anything with it. Here's why. When the state legislature originally allotted $7 million in grant money, they specifically earmarked it for the state veterans' homes. And I shook my head and said, oh my God, they got it wrong. We're meticulous about following appropriation law. And I said, if we're restricted to spending that money in the state veterans homes, we can't do that ethically. We've already gotten COVID relief money we've spent in the homes.
Yeah.
There's no way I can ethically spend $7 million in the state veterans homes. I could waste the money. It would not be right to the taxpayers of Alabama. So we repeatedly went back to the legislature and said, can't do it this way. The original intent was a general grant program that benefited nonprofits in the state who are already serving veterans. It took us months to get a change from the legislature allowing us to use that money where it needed to be used. So one outlet reported so many false things clearly at the behest of those in government, specifically from the governor's office. So I wish them luck in court, but that's all going to come out. And the facts are pretty solid. And it was poor reporting out there. But you know this, you report false facts that put someone in a bad light. We have a term for that. It's called defamation. So good luck.
Wow.
I've got nothing to lose at this point. They can't fire me anymore. And I'm retired from the military and the federal civil service. I'm now pretty set for life. Got health care benefits back through my military retirement. So
Good.
come at me.
I was going
And
to
you're
ask
healthy
you what your,
and ready. Yeah.
Got my health back. I'm in fighting form now. And I'm telling you, there are about 400,000 veterans in this state who are probably behind me.
I've talked to other people who were in a compromised health position that were kind of the target of attacks, maybe not political attacks, but from their companies or whatever. And when they pull through, they say, "Look at me now,"
Yeah.
Come at
They
me.
they
You
came
thought I
at
was
me in
dead,
my most
but now look.
They came at me at my most vulnerable point, and I know all the players that were involved because I've had people come to me. I've had people record conversations and come back to me. It's like, okay, I got my health back now. I'm in fighting form. You'd better be ready. You want to talk? I'll be glad to talk now, quietly. If you're not willing to talk, we're going to play hardball.
I did think it was
I love
funny.
it.
For full transparency here, when Whitney forwarded me an email to let me know that you were coming on, it was funny, a comment that you made when you said, "Hey, I'm on your side," or I'm trying to think of how it was worded, but like letting us know essentially that you're not just trying to get in there and be a plant, I guess you would say, a plant hack to just say like, "Hey, these issues are really happening. People are targeted," and
Oh,
because Whitney and I, we have to, when we talk to people and we have different sources, we always ask, we'll have a conversation between the two of us and say, "What do you think? Do they have good intentions, or where are we going at, or what kind of information are they sending over?" That's why we have to verify everything, because like you said, as a reporter myself, Kent, I would never publish something that I, number one, didn't verify, but number two, that I knew wasn't true. So that's
Oh my
crazy
gosh,
to
I would
know
never.
that somebody would risk their entire career to put out information against you that was not true. That's crazy to me to think about.
There's one outlet in the state that's funded by the taxpayers that basically I think is state-sponsored media that's reported some falsehoods. Good luck. Like I said, we'll see how that turns out for you. And there has been a backlash against that outlet. A lot of people questioning, why are taxpayers paying for that outlet? So we'll see. Like I said, things are going to heat up, I think, real soon. Now, we are waiting on a ruling from a federal judge. That's going to be critical. But even if that ruling is not favorable, that's not the end of it, I promise. And there will be, even if that ruling does not go my favor, there's going to be some giggling about it in the governor's office. Well, good luck. That's not going to be the end of it. And their PR effort has not exactly been good. If you look at the media coverage over the last year, and that's not going to end either. And there's a lot of shenanigans still going on related to all of those issues that they're bold enough or crazy enough to keep trying that are probably going to get some more media coverage. I think the news media is finally starting to wake up. Not only the voters, the taxpayers, but I think even the news media is starting to wake up and say, wait a minute, this is not right. There's a lot of corruption going on in state government that we need to expose and get back to investigative journalism. There have been some great examples of that. And look, giving credit where credit is due. Langyap News down here in Mobile, Alabama, where I work now, They have done some great investigative journalism. I want to
Yes,
give
they
them
have.
credit.
Yeah.
1819 News has done some exposés that I think are excellent, and they are brave enough to go out on a limb and take on some folks and some issues that need to be addressed. The best antiseptic is sunshine. And I'm glad to
Absolutely.
see that there is a little bit of sunshine being spread on some of these issues from good folks like you two as well. And I mean that sincerely.
Thank you.
Putting it on my LinkedIn. You know, every time we get something good like that said, I'm going to put it on my LinkedIn. It's just piling up here. But that's crazy though. I mean, think about it. When somebody says something to us about speaking out about this, why are we suddenly on this pedestal because we are speaking out? Why is everybody not doing this? Why is
Well, a lot of
every
people are
person
afraid.
on social media not just social media, but in any aspect? Why are we not having conversations like this with our neighbors? Why are we not posting about it? Why are we not holding people accountable as they should be? Why are we not doing that?
Some people are scared. They see the repercussions. Look, we've talked about some of the examples, and I've had plenty of people come up to me and say, man, I saw what happened to you. I'm not sure I want to go through that. I've had people with legitimate, even criminal evidence in some cases who say, I'm just not sure I can risk it because they will come after me. And they will. But
Well,
that's a little cowardly. We all need to be brave as citizens. It is tough. But as someone told me in the past, you know, you don't do the right thing. You don't raise ethics concerns because it's easy. You do it because it's the right thing, period.
Period.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think too, there's even news sources around the state that I think do what I would consider a decent job. I have challenged journalists face to face at recent events. I think that they do a good job, but I know that I'm getting handed information that they are also getting handed. And me, as an independent journalist with far less funding and reach, I'll report on it. But, I also would challenge some of these conservative, news sources that we have in Alabama. Don't just report on what feels safe. It's
Yeah.
not really helping us.
Yep. You're absolutely right. We need more investigative journalism. It has
Yeah.
become a dying art in this country. Now, there's institutional reasons for that. We've seen a huge change in the news media. And full disclosure, for much of my career, I was a public affairs officer in the military, and I retired as vice chief of information for the Navy. I dealt with the top dogs in the news media in Afghanistan, at the Pentagon. But over the last 20 to 30 years, I saw drastic changes in the news media. And frankly, I saw a decline in investigative journalism. And that's a little sad because they have been an important watchdog in this country to hold especially elected officials accountable in this nation. I think we need more of that.
So I think this is a great plug for this, Kent. This is something that my team and I, not just Whitney, I don't even think I've told Whitney about this, but my team and I have decided to run something similar to a Citizen Sleuth University, where we teach people how to, number one, how media influences public perception and how to find the information that we're finding, to encourage people to do their own research and know how to use that information responsibly. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned because we're definitely going to be pushing that pretty soon. It'll be a little bit different from a public corruption standpoint, but it will definitely include that as part of the focus. It's really true crime related because that's essentially what I'm passionate about. But yeah, stay tuned because we are going to encourage. That is the goal, is to encourage other people to do exactly what we're doing, so that we actually have a chance of making actual impact. So.
Outstanding. That's all I have to say about that. I think
We're
need more on
trying. We're trying.
Yeah. We
Keep
may
it
need
up.
to teach a class at Citizen Sleuth University.
Yeah, listen, I could go on for hours. I've worked in federal government, city government, and state government, and the private sector. I know where a lot of the skeletons are in closets. And if people would listen, I could help fix things. I just do not see a lot of motivation in the state to actually address those issues. You have a lot of people that are very comfortable with the system because they benefit personally from it. Their egos benefit. Sometimes they benefit financially from it. And I do agree with you. I think people are getting fed up, but it's going to take a popular, legal, ethical revolt, a noble revolt amongst the people to say, we're tired of it. We're fed up.
Mm-hmm.
We've had enough of this. We expect more out of you. We have a constitutional republic. We elect you to serve us and do it selflessly without personal benefit to you, both financially and your ego. And until we get to that point, it's going to continue, I'm afraid.
Well, hopefully we're helping to do something about it here. Hopefully that's part of our advocacy. I think this is probably a good stopping point, Kent. We would love to have you back on. We'll
Yes.
talk for hours too. We love to yap. So
Anytime.
if you want to continue on about this, we are happy to have you on.
Absolutely. You invite me back, I'd be honored.
Yeah, and I'm serious.
Thank
I would
you.
love to have you as a part of Citizen Sleuth University and to kind of put some of your expertise out there. We'd love to have you back. All right.
Thanks so much,
Anything else
Neeli.
you want to note here before we cut you off?
Now, anybody listening to this, if you'd like to talk about some of these issues, reach out. I'll be glad to talk. Good, bad, and ugly. And if some of those who need to listen to this want to talk to me, would love to talk to you. I will do it very professionally and calmly, but we'll see if that happens.
I'm taking
love
bets that it will not. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us, Kent. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye now.
Thank you.
Make It Make Sense, Alabama is brought to you by Murder Creek Media. If you've never heard of us and want to check out some of our other projects, including our investigative true crime series, visit murdercreekmedia.com to learn more. Thanks for listening, and we'll see y'all soon.